The creation-evolution controversy involves an ongoing, recurring cultural, political, and theological dispute about the origins of the Earth, of humanity, and of other life. On one hand, evolution by natural selection is an empirical scientific fact. On the other hand, the theory of evolution conflicts with the religious doctrines of creationism, which are widely regarded in the scientific community as pseudoscience. While the controversy has a long history, today it has retreated to be mainly over what constitutes good science education, with the politics of creationism primarily focusing on the teaching of creation and evolution in public education. Among majority Christian countries, the debate is most prominent in the United States, and to a lesser extent in Europe and elsewhere, and is often portrayed as part of a culture war. Parallel controversies also exist in some other religious communities, such as the more fundamentalist branches of Judaism and Islam. Christian fundamentalists dispute the evidence of common descent of humans and other animals as demonstrated in modern paleontology, genetics, histology and cladistics, and those other subdisciplines which are based upon the conclusions of modern evolutionary biology, geology, cosmology, and other related fields. They argue for the Abrahamic accounts of creation, framing them as reputable science. The Catholic Church recognizes the existence of evolution. Pope Francis has stated, "God is not a divine being or a magician, but the creator who brought everything to life." Evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution requires the creation of beings that evolve. The rules of genetic evolutionary inheritance were first discovered by a Catholic priest, the Augustinian monk Gregor Mendel, who is known today as the founder of modern genetics. According to a 2014 Gallup survey, more than 4 in 10 Americans continue to believe that God created humans in the present form 10,000 years ago, a view that has changed little over the past 3 decades. Half of Americans believe humans evolved, with the majority of these saying God guided the evolutionary process. However, the percentage who say God was not involved is rising. The debate is sometimes portrayed as being between science and religion, and the United States National Academy of Sciences states, "Today, many religious denominations accept that biological evolution has produced the diversity of living things over billions of years of Earth's history." Many have issued statements observing that evolution and the tenets of the faiths are compatible. Scientists and theologians have written eloquently about their awe and wonder at the history of the universe and of life on this planet, explaining that they see no conflict between the faith in God and the evidence for evolution. Religious denominations that do not accept the occurrence of evolution tend to be those that believe in strictly literal interpretations of religious texts. History. The creation-evolution controversy began in Europe and North America in the late 18th century, when new interpretations of geological evidence led to various theories of an ancient Earth, and findings of extinctions demonstrated in the fossil geological sequence prompted early ideas of evolution, notably Lamarckism. In England, these ideas of continuing change were at first seen as a threat to the existing, fixed, social order, and both church and state sought to repress them. Conditions gradually eased, and in 1844 Robert Chambers' controversial Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation popularized the idea of gradual transmutation of species. The scientific establishment at first dismissed it scornfully, and the Church of England reacted with fury, but many Unitarians, Quakers and Baptists. Groups opposed to the privileges of the established church favored its ideas of God acting through such natural laws. Contemporary reaction to Darwin. The publication of Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 brought scientific credibility to evolution, and made it a respectable field of study. Despite the intense interest in the religious implications of Darwin's book, theological controversy over higher criticism set out in essays and reviews largely diverted the Church of England's attention. Some of the liberal Christian authors of that work expressed support for Darwin, as did many nonconformists. The Reverend Charles Kingsley, for instance, openly supported the idea of God working through evolution. Other Christians opposed the idea, and even some of Darwin's close friends and supporters, including Charles Lyell and Asher Gray, initially expressed reservations about some of his ideas. Gray later became a staunch supporter of Darwin in America, and collected together a number of his own writings to produce an influential book, Darwiniana. These essays argued for a conciliation between Darwinian evolution and the tenets of theism, at a time when many on both sides perceived the two as mutually exclusive. Gray said that investigation of physical causes was not opposed to the theological view and the study of the harmonies between mind and nature, and thought it most presumable that an intellectual conception realized in nature would be realized through natural agencies. Thomas Huxley, who strongly promoted Darwin's ideas while campaigning to end the dominance of science by the clergy, coined the term agnostic to describe his position that God's existence is unknowable. Darwin also took this position, but prominent atheists including Edward Aveling and Ludwig Buchner also took up evolution, and it was criticized, in the words of one reviewer, as tantamount to atheism. Following the lead of figures such as St. George Jackson Mivart and John Augustine Zahm, Roman Catholics in the United States became accepting of evolution itself while ambivalent towards natural selection and stressing humanity's divinely imbued soul. The Catholic Church never condemned evolution, and initially the more conservative-leaning Catholic leadership in Rome held back, but gradually adopted a similar position. During the late 19th century, evolutionary ideas were most strongly disputed by the premillennialists, who held to a prophecy of the imminent return of Christ based on a form of biblical literalism, and were convinced that the Bible would be invalidated if any error in the scriptures was conceded. However, hardly any of the critics of evolution at the time were as concerned about geology, freely granting scientists any time they needed before the Edenic creation to account for scientific observations, such as fossils and geological findings. In the immediate post-Darwinian era, few scientists or clerics rejected the antiquity of the Earth, the progressive nature of the fossil record. Likewise, few attached geological significance to the biblical flood, unlike subsequent creationists, evolutionary skeptics. Creationist leaders and skeptical scientists were usually either willing to adopt a figurative reading of the first chapter of the book of Genesis, or allowed that the 6 days of creation were not necessarily 24-hour days. Science professors at liberal northeastern universities almost immediately embraced the theory of evolution and introduced it to the students. However, some people in parts of the South and West of the United States, which had been influenced by the preachings of Christian fundamentalist evangelicals, rejected the theory as immoral. In the United Kingdom, evangelical creationists were in a tiny minority. The Victoria Institute was formed in 1865 in response to essays and reviews on Darwin's On the Origin of Species. It was not officially opposed to evolution theory, but its main founder James Ready objected to Darwin's work as inharmonious and utterly incredible, and Philip Henry Goss, author of Omphalos, was a vice president. The institute's membership increased to 1897, then declined sharply. In the 1920s, George Macready Price attended and made several presentations of his creationist views, which found little support among the members. In 1927, John Ambrose Fleming was made president, while he insisted on creation of the soul. His acceptance of divinely guided development and of pre-Adamite humanity meant he was thought of as a theistic evolutionist. Creationism in theology at the beginning of the 19th century debate had started to develop over applying historical methods to biblical criticism, suggesting a less literal account of the Bible. Simultaneously, the developing science of geology indicated the Earth was ancient, and religious thinkers sought to accommodate this by day-age creationism, a gap creationism, Neptunianist catastrophism, which had in the 17th and 18th centuries proposed that a universal flood could explain all geological features, gave way to ideas of geological gradualism based upon the erosion and depositional cycle over millions of years, which gave a better explanation of the sedimentary column. Biology and the discovery of extinction challenged ideas of a fixed, mutable Aristotelian great chain of being. Natural theology had earlier expected that scientific findings based on empirical evidence would help religious understanding. These differences led some to increasingly regard science and theology as concerned with different, non-competitive domains. When most scientists came to accept evolution, European theologians generally came to accept evolution as an instrument of God. Pope Leo XIII, for instance, referred to long-standing Christian thought that scriptural interpretations could be re-evaluated in the light of new knowledge, and Roman Catholics came around to acceptance of human evolution subject to direct creation of the soul. In the United States, the development of the racist social Darwinian eugenics movement by certain circles led a number of Catholics to reject evolution. In this enterprise they received little aid from conservative Christians in Great Britain and Europe. In Britain this has been attributed to the minority status leading to a more tolerant, less militant theological tradition. This continues to the present. In his speech at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in 2014, Pope Francis declared that he accepted the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution, and God was not a magician with a magic wand. Development of creationism in the United States. At first in the U.S., evangelical Christians paid little attention to the developments in geology and biology, being more concerned with the rise of European higher biblical criticism which questioned the belief in the Bible as literal truth. Those criticizing these approaches took the name fundamentalist, originally coined by its supporters to describe a specific package of theological beliefs that developed into a movement within the Protestant community of the United States in the early part of the 20th century, and which had its roots in the fundamentalist modernist controversy of the 1920s and 1930s. The term usually has a religious connotation indicating unwavering attachment to a set of irreducible beliefs. Up until the early mid-20th century, mainline denominations within the United States showed little official resistance to evolution. Around the start of the 20th century, some evangelical scholars had ideas accommodating evolution, such as B. Warfield, who saw it as a natural law expressing God's will. By then most U.S. high school and college biology classes taught scientific evolution, but several factors, including the rise of Christian fundamentalism and social factors of changes and insecurity in more traditionalist Bible Belt communities, led to a backlash. The numbers of children receiving secondary education increased rapidly, and parents who had fundamentalist tendencies or who opposed social ideas of what was called survival of the fittest had real concerns about what the children were learning about evolution. British creationism. The main British creationist movement in this period, the evolution protest movement, formed in the 1930s out of the Victoria Institute, or Philosophical Society of Great Britain. The Victoria Institute had the stated objective of defending the great truths revealed in Holy Scripture, against the opposition of science falsely so-called. Although it did not officially oppose evolution, it attracted a number of scientists skeptical of Darwinism, including John William Dawson and Arnold Guyot. It reached a high point of 1,246 members in 1897, but quickly plummeted to less than one-third of that figure in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Although it was anti-evolution at first, the Institute joined the theistic evolution camp by the 1920s, which led to the development of the evolution protest movement in reaction. Amateur ornithologist Douglas Dewitt, the main driving force within the EPM, published a booklet entitled Man, A Special Creation, and engaged in public speaking and debates with supporters of evolution. In the late 1930s he resisted American creationists' call for acceptance of flood geology, which later led to conflict within the organization. Despite trying to win the public endorsement of C.S. Lewis, the most prominent Christian apologist of his day, by the mid-1950s the EPM came under control of schoolmaster, Pastor Albert G. Tilney, whose dogmatic and authoritarian style ran the organization as a one-man band, rejecting flood geology, unwaveringly promoting gap creationism, and reducing the membership to lethargic inactivity. It was renamed Creation Science Movement in 1980, under the chairmanship of David Roseveare, who holds a Ph.D. in organometallic chemistry from the University of Bristol. By the mid-1980s the CSM had formally incorporated flood geology into its deed of trust, and condemned gap creationism and day-age creationism as unscriptural.